Hello, today's daily reading comes from the book of the Apocrypha. We are reading from the book of 3rd Maccabees, chapter 4, and it reads as follows. Wherever this decree was received, the people kept it in a revelry of joy and shouting, as if their long pent-up heart and hatred were now to show itself openly. The Jews suffered great throes of sorrow and wept much, while their hearts, all things around being lamentable, were set on fire as they mourned the sudden destruction which was decreed against them. What home or city or place at all inhabited, or what streets were there, which their condition didn't fill with wailing and lamentation? They were sent out unanimously by the generals in the several cities with such stern and pitiless feeling that the exceptional nature of the infliction moved even some of their enemies. These, influenced by sentiments of common humanity and reflecting upon the uncertain issue of life, shed tears at this their miserable expulsions. A multitude of aged, hoary haired old men were driven along with halting, bending feet, urged onward by the impulse of a violent, shameless force to quick speed. Girls who had entered the bridal chamber quite lately to enjoy the partnership of marriage exchanged pleasure for misery, and with dust scattered upon their mirth anointed heads, were hurried along unveiled, and in the midst of the outlandish insults set up with one accord a lamentable cry instead of the marriage hymn. Bound and exposed to public gaze, they were hurried violently on board ship. The husbands of these, in the prime of their youthful vigor, instead of crowns, wore halters around their necks. Instead of feasting and youthful celebration, spent the rest of their nuptial days in wailing and saw only the graves at hand. They were dragged along by unyielding chains like wild beasts. Of these, some had their necks thrust into the benches of the rowers, while the feet of others were enclosed in hard fetters. The planks of the deck above them blocked out the light and shut out the day on every side, so that they might be treated like traitors during the whole voyage. They were conveyed accordingly in this vessel, and at the end of it arrived at Shadelia. The king had ordered them to be cast into the vast hippodrome, which was built in front of the city. This place was well adapted by its situation to expose them to the gaze of all comers into the city, and of those who went from the city into the country, so they could hold no communication with his forces. No accommodation. When this was done, the king, hearing that their kindred in the city often went out and lamented in melancholy distress of their victims, was full of rage and commanded that they should be carefully subjected to the same and not one but milder treatment. The whole nation was now to be registered. Every individual was to be specified by name, not for that hard servitude of labor which we have a little before mentioned, but that he might expose them to the before mentioned tortures, and finally, in the short space of a day, might extirpate them by his cruelties. The registering of these men was carried on cruelly, zealously, assiduously, from the rising of the sun to its going down, and was not brought to an end in 40 days. The king was filled with great and constant joy, and celebrated banquets before the temple idols. His erring heart, far from the truth, and his profane mouth gave glory to idols, deaf and incapable of speaking or aiding, and uttered unworthy speech against the greatest God. At the end of the above mentioned interval of time, the registers brought word to the king that the multitude of the Jews was too great for registration, and as much as there were many still left in the land, of whom some were inhabited houses, and others were scattered about the various places, so that all the commanders in Egypt were insufficient for the work, the king threatened them, and charged them with taking bribes in order to contrive the escape of the Jews, but was clearly convinced of the truth of what had been said. They said and proved that paper and pens had failed them for the carrying out of their purpose. Now, this was an act of interference of the unconquerable providence which assisted the Jews from heaven. Amen.